I want to welcome everyone here this evening. I'm Aaron Shapiro, the Executive Director of Patapsco and Greenway. We are delighted to host the third annual Charles L. Wagandt II Memorial Lecture. I want to give a shout out to our Heritage Program Coordinator, Kyla Pools, who helped to organize much of this event. But she said, Aaron, go ahead and just welcome everybody. And my job is basically to turn it over to our board member extraordinaire, Lisa Jensen, to talk a little bit about Charles and to introduce the speakers. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa, and thank you all for being here this evening.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Lisa Jensen, and I've been a board member of Patapsco Heritage Greenway for about 17 years. And I want to tell you a little bit about Charles. In late 1988, as a professional historic preservationist, I interviewed with Charles Wagandt, seeking to provide him some consulting services as he rehabbed many of the historic houses in Oella. Ironically, the first thing he asked me to do was to supervise the construction of 4 new townhouses nestled seamlessly into the historic mill village from footing to rooftop. That was the beginning of a great partnership based on mutual admiration, and having worked for him for many years, I became one of his biggest fans. I nominated him for Maryland's 2 highest preservation awards, which Charles justifiably received, along with other preservation awards for his lifetime achievements. I speak from the heart as I share this introduction. As many of you are aware, Charles Louis Wagandt II, who passed in 2020, is known for his maverick and innovative ideas and dedicated work ethic, often working 7 days a week in Oella, focused primarily in Oella and in the central Patapsco River Valley. He was an avid hiker and a preservationist who wished to share the Patapsco area's unique character and its rich historic and environmental resources with the general public. He was a true scholar and a gentleman of the highest integrity, as well as an extremely modest man. In case you're not familiar with his efforts, I'll summarize a smattering. Best known for his work in Oella, Charles purchased the textile mill village, but not the mill itself, from W.J. Dickey and Sons that operated the textile mill from 1887 until the spring of 1972, before Tropical Storm Agnes hit. The land he purchased from his family's corporation stretched from Lower Granite Hill, near the Ellicott City Bridge and Lot A, all the way up to Oella Avenue intersection with Race Road and beyond. By the way, Lot A is a public parking lot now because Charles had the vision to go to the owner of the building that has the Trolley Stop restaurant and suggest that they each chip in half the land and donate it to Baltimore County so that Howard County could pay for the construction of a parking lot so it would benefit the general public. Just one of those things that Charles did. With truly challenging bedrock, steep hilly topography, this is Ground Hill, the first kind of S-turn as you go up Oella Avenue. With truly challenging granite bedrock, steep hilly topography, no public water and sewer, and slide in there, sorry, all right. This is the back of Ground Hill, the Historic American Building Survey slide. And there were occupied and unoccupied mill worker residences. There at the lower left corner, you can see one of the outhouses for the residences. And this is another view of Spring Street, which is facing along the river. These are all workers' houses pre-rehab. That's probably taken in about the mid-1980s. There were also associated structures, such as a church and community hall. The community hall is seen at the right. And many might have considered Charles a bit off his rocker in his attempt to tackle the revitalization of the entire mill village. But with diplomacy and perseverance for over a dozen years, he cajoled Baltimore County officials into providing the community with public water and sewer through and over the valley granite bedrock. This is a photograph taken behind Long Brick Row, which is a row of 19 brick houses you'll see later. But you'll notice the outhouses and the chicken pigeon coops, I don't even know what they are, on the left there. So this is before Charles really started his renovation. To put this timing of seeking to get the public water and sewer into context, for those of us with gray hair, you may remember that Charles achieved this goal after many Oella residents already had cable TV, and 4 years after, then Mayor William Donald Schaefer carried his rubber ducky into the National Aquarium's Inner Harbor seal tank. Everybody remember, older people remember that? Oella finally got public water and sewer in 1985, thanks to Charles. With that feat in his rearview mirror, Charles began in earnest the restoration and the historic rehab of 106 existing houses, and he planned for new infill construction as well. His focus was on preserving the character of the village, especially as seen from up the Oella Avenue spine. Here's long brick roads, 19 contiguous houses. Some existing houses, such as this row, were renovated by others, but he and the Oella company supervised most of the rehabs in the village and the 4 new townhomes I mentioned. There's an after of Spring Street that you saw before. Charles made sure that any former Dickey millworker family that wished to continue living in Oella during its renaissance could, through social services programs and his own discounted rents. Concurrently, as a trustee on the board of the Maryland Historic Trust, Charles learned of grant funding opportunities. Believing the public deserved to know as much as possible about America's first black man of science, Charles pressed for archaeological investigation to locate the site of Benjamin Banneker's log cabin in Upper Oella, which had burned in 1806 on the day of his funeral. When the first round of archaeological investigations wasn't conclusive, Charles didn't rest. He sought assistance and funding for more research, and with guidance from historian John McGrain's research, the archaeological focus was narrowed, and eventually a reproduction log cabin was erected on the site as part of the Benjamin Banneker Historic Park and Museum. It was at Charles's urging that a nonprofit was created to partner with Baltimore County in the development of that historic site and museum. Charles also persisted for 16 years following the 1975 flood to get the 1789 George Ellicott house, the last surviving Ellicott family home, moved out of the Ellicott Mills floodplain across Frederick Road, you can see it here, set on top of a new basement foundation. And you can see it's now in its new site, cribbing above the new foundation where they had to build the walls up to meet it, and restored for modern use. Charles hoped, and we're talking back in 1975, 1980, 1985, he hoped it would be the Heritage Greenway's Visitor Center. How's that for thinking in it far in advance for what we actually got? In order to do that, he assembled dedicated individuals, rallied local organizations, worked on fundraising, applied for and received grant funds, negotiated easements, hired contractors, and even finished the historic rehab with his own forces when the general contractor filed for bankruptcy. Working with the Ellicott City Restoration Foundation, Historic Ellicott City, Inc., EC Business Association, Charles helped found the nonprofit host of this evening's program, now known as Patapsco Heritage Greenway. This is an older logo. It was a long name, Patapsco. It was too long for anybody to remember and constantly confused with the Friends of the State Park. It was a collaborative nonprofit organization dedicated to preservation, recreation, sustainable environmental practices, and the economic development within the valley. Not economic development like bringing massive businesses in, just trying to promote and keep the valley viable. By obtaining an initial Maryland Historic Trust grant for the nonprofit, Charles led the effort to document oral histories, recording memories and photos of the Patapsco Valley mill workers and their residents. Tonight, where we have books we have over there, there is a culmination book, not published by PHG, but if you want to see some of the stories and the photos, they're available in that book if you're interested. Thereafter, Charles and his team carried on tape recording additional oral histories of older Oella residents, capturing as many memories as possible while they could still tell their own stories. Recently, the body of that transcribed work and Charles's massive collection of Oella history, artifacts, and memorabilia was archived and moved under curatorship of the UMBC archives. Decades ago, through Charles's efforts, with some of the W.J. Dickey and Sons textile mill records were acquired by the Smithsonian for safekeeping. Among other projects, Charles lobbied and applied for grant funding to inventory industrial structures along the Patapsco, such as quarries, mills, factories, dams, etc., along the Patapsco from Elkridge to Route 40. That was his particular focus. So you can see what the dam, the Oella Dam, which would be right immediately downstream of Route 40, what that looked like. And then as it was being torn down, you can see the wood cribbing down below. So originally the dam was built out of wood and later covered with concrete. The major inventory that was done by historic site surveyor Henry K. Sharp investigated the industrial heritage of the Patapsco River Valley. Charles found that documentation so thorough and so compelling, he spearheaded the publication of Howe's work into a book. And it's hard to find right now, but you can get it through the library. No, wrong one, next one, sorry. That's his first book, we're on to that very soon. The American Industrial Revolution indeed had very early roots here in our valley, and not exclusively as previously attributed to New England. Historian at heart, Charles promoted the public education of that fact, as well as the valley's early diversity of industry and commerce. And here's Charles talking to Henry Kay, or Hal Sharp, the author of that book, at one of the public presentations we had. He later brokered initial deals among Patapsco Heritage Greenway, Heritage Area Funding, and the Howard County funding channeled through the Howard County Historical Society. A lot of organizations had to get involved for the publication of Henry K. Sharp's second book, America's First Factory Town, which Justine is holding up in the back, and it's available for purchase tonight. Early on, Charles was the first person I ever heard mention a vision, his vision, for a Patapsco Valley heritage area. And that was over a quarter century before it came to fruition in 2015. Frankly, our heritage area never would have been created without his innovative vision and his perseverance. As the 13th heritage area in Maryland, ours boasts the only dual focus, Charles Wagandt's special blend, like a special blend of coffee, preservation of heritage as well as natural resources. In tonight's talk on State Park Trails, we'll hear about accessibility and connectivity, themes that were near and dear to Charles's heart. Concurrently with his George Eliot House efforts, Charles worked for close to 20 years to encourage and enable the state park to create its first accessible trail, the Grist Mill Trail from Ilchester to Avalon. That required, so that's a lovely part of it, pre-accessibility. You had to walk or bicycle across the water. It required the lobbying of government agencies, politicians, state officials, as well as trying to win over the local Sierra Club, whose position at that time was that there should be no paved trails within the state park. Unfortunately, he never realized another goal of his, which was to create a loop trail up one side of the river and down the other, connected across the river near the Route 40 bridge for the north end. Charles worked tirelessly for inclusivity and accessibility to make our heritage and our environment available to all. Tonight we focus on state park trails, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce our featured speakers. Robert Bailey was born and raised in Maryland and developed an interest in the history of the Patapsco River in the late 1990s. He was a volunteer for Patapsco Heritage Greenway, a different name at the time, but same organization. Since then, he worked as a historian and a ranger with the Maryland Park Service. He has an MA in American History from SUNY Binghamton, where he studied the establishment and the development of the Patapsco State Forest Reserve in the early 20th century. And if you don't know what that is, that's what we now call the park. Dave Ferraro is the executive director of the Friends of the Patapsco Valley State Park. Prior to his tenure at Friends, Dave worked for 20 years in museums and cultural institutions, including the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Smithsonian Institution Office of Architectural History and Historic Preservation, the National Aquarium, the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of African American History and Culture, and the Rachel Carson Homestead. Dave serves on several boards, including the Maryland Tourism Development Board, the Maryland Parks and Recreation Commission, the Recreation Trail Program Advisory Committee, and the Baltimore County Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. And if you think he doesn't do enough, wait to hear this next paragraph. Dave has been running, hiking, riding, and paddling in the Patapsco Valley State Park for 35 years. He lives in the Patapsco Valley State Park as a DNR, Department of Natural Resources curator resident of the reserve property, an early 19th century stone millworker's house. And as if one 200-year-old house isn't enough, he and his wife have a second home on Granite Hill and Noel Avenue. That first photograph I showed you was Granite Hill. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our featured speakers.
Okay. This is an interesting trip back in time for me. A lot of familiar faces from years ago. As was stated, I was originally volunteer for the Heritage Greenway back in the 1990s, and then became a seasonal interpreter at the Patapsco Valley State Park in the early 2000s. And then I left the area, and now I'm back, so it's an interesting full circle. At one point, I was very passionate about the history of the Patapsco Valley. I fashioned myself to be somewhat of an expert. Of course, that's kind of hard to be when all the experts, how far you go back, all the experts are usually dead. You go back a certain distance. But nevertheless, it was always near and dear to my heart. It is not a topic I've studied a great deal in more recent times, but it's always fun to go back. So I was asked to speak about connectivity, and I usually thought, well, transportation corridors. So I'm going to talk a lot about transportation corridors and how that eventually sort of morphed into the park. Hopefully that's the right topic. If it's not, we'll try next time. One thing I want to say real quick. I didn't know Charles Wagandt well, but I did know him. I met him a few times. I got to sit in his office a couple of times. He was a very fascinating man. And I remember when I was researching something in UMBC, when I was an undergraduate there, I came across a book called The Mighty Revolution, Negro Emancipation in Maryland, 1862 to 1864 by Charles Wagandt. What? So he was a very fascinating man. He was also, in case you didn't, there's one thing you forgot to mention, he was also a published author. He wrote, and his book is still largely written in the 1960s. It still is largely one of the go-to books for the history of emancipation in Maryland. So I'm going to talk about a person who could probably have done almost anything he wanted. Charles Wagandt is probably one of those people. So he was a very fascinating individual. So with that, let me get into this. I decided to put together a history of transportation corridors, and I came up with some basic sort of summary statements. You know, like any good interpreter, or if you're writing a research paper, you got to sort of have a thesis. So this is where I kind of landed when I was looking at this topic. Since before colonial times, many important transportation corridors have crossed, and still to this day cross, the Patapsco Valley. However, since colonial times, the Patapsco River's narrow corridors and periodic floods combined with competing uses have made routing transportation corridors through the valley challenging or difficult, to say the least. And trails have been an integral part of the Patapsco Valley State Park from its beginnings as a forest reserve in 1907 to the present day, and have the potential to provide a level of connectivity not seen since the late 1940s. So, now I get to multitask here. I tried doing a little bit of research into American Indians and transportation in the Patapsco Valley and did not find much. State Highways Administration is actually pulling together a study of Indian corridors in Maryland, and so I reached out to them and I got a couple of interesting tidbits, but since I'm not a practicing archaeologist, my access to information on this topic is somewhat limited, but I still wanted to include it. So one thing I found is that there were basically two transportation corridors that American Indians used that have been documented, not by archaeologists, but by other documentation, that did at least cross through the valley. One is this corridor you see here, which basically follows the route of Old Port Road. This road was first built in the 1730s and was documented to basically follow the route of the old Indian Trail. Now, Indian trails before the arrival of the colonists were probably pretty narrow, since they did not have horses or cows or mules or large wagons, so they were probably pretty narrow. So they were probably not going to be nearly as substantial as those that came later. The second one, which I don't have here, was called the Warrior's Path, which largely followed the alignment of present-day Frederick Road. There are notations in Martha Ellicott Tyson's account of the Ellicotts first arriving in Patapsco in the early 1770s where she said they had to follow Indian trails the last couple of miles from Elkridge Landing up to what is now Elkridge City. Unfortunately, Martha Elliott Tyson was born after these events took place, so you do have to take it with a grain of salt. They could have been Indian trails, they could have been fur trapper trails, etc. But American Indians lived in the Patapsco for 4,000 or 5,000 years before Europeans got here, so there's a good chance that there were probably many trails at one point in time in the Patapsco. Do any of them make up the current road system? I don't know, it's hard to say. One of the things about transportation in the Patapsco is you have to remember, prior to the early 18th century, there was not a lot of overland transportation in Maryland at all. Maryland was primarily a colony based on water transportation. The eastern shore, the southern Maryland, is all the coastal plain. You can take a boat very, very far up rivers. They're very navigable. And so because the Piedmont portion was not settled until later, most of your earlier maps, this is a map from 1685, that's probably still fairly accurate today, sea level rise perhaps notwithstanding, of what you would find on the water routes. But as you can see, as you go upland, there's not a whole lot there. That does say Patapsco. That's one of those funny S's that look like F's on there that they used to use back in the old days. But it really wasn't until they started penetrating inland that you start seeing a larger picture of what the transportation corridor. But even then, it's kind of vague. One of the reasons why is because roads were very temporary early on. The early roads were primarily rolling roads. The primary crop grown in Maryland in the 17th and 18th century was tobacco. So they would clear fields, grow a monocrop agriculture with tobacco, and then they needed to get it to the water. And one of the problems is as they started to penetrate the Piedmont, they had a harder time getting it to the water. So they started putting in what were called rolling roads, which essentially were widened paths, could be followed Indian paths, probably just went from the Packer field is here, the place we want to take it is there, point A to point B. We're not going to really design this very well. And that's how the roads were probably constructed. No maps exist of these roads. They were probably very temporary. Perhaps some of them are permanent roads today. Today's rolling road is believed to be a descendant who originated as a rolling road, but that's more legend than fact, probably. Tobacco hogsheads were not as large as you think they were. They were only about 4 feet wide, but they weighed 1,000 pounds. So they didn't need a huge track. It's not like we needed a full-size road, but they were large enough. They were certainly larger than anything the American Indians would have used. And they probably were not very sustainable. But that, as a result, most of the early transportation corridors were probably of this nature. The reason why we had Elkridge Landing is because Elkridge Landing was about as far as you could take an ocean-going vessel inland before you ran out of navigable water. There was, at one point in time, a waterfall of some kind that signaled the end of navigable transportation on the Patapsco. Where exactly it was is open to debate. It was probably more a cascade than a waterfall. But as you can see on this 1776 map, the mouth of the Patapsco, where it separates from the middle branch and the northeast branch, was about 2 fathoms deep, so it's about 6 feet deep. And so it probably maintained that depth, at least as far as Elkridge Landing. This is an artist rendering of Elkridge Landing, a very inaccurate one that was done in the 1970s, but nevertheless it gives you a flavor of what the scene may have, how the scene may have appeared. I'm not going to pick on it too much, but it does kind of give you a flavor. That you can see, I think it's either supposed to be a waterfall or a dam near the iron furnace, which would have been the Elkridge furnace, in the mid-18th century. Unfortunately, I think the furnace was actually downstream from the landing, not upstream from the landing. But nevertheless, it gives you a good flavor.
That's looking upstream.
It's looking upstream, yes, and the dam is upstream from the landing, and I think, if that's indeed, it's showing the furnace upstream from the landing, and I think the furnace was downstream from the landing. So, one really cool map I found that I had never seen before was this one in my research. I was very excited to find this. This is a map of the post road going from Philadelphia to Annapolis. And believe it or not, north is to the left and south is to the right. And I had never actually seen this, and so since I found it, I was excited that I'd love to see it today too. This shows the what is now present-day Route 1 coming out of Baltimore, crossing over Herbert Run, then going over a little rise, and then diving down the hill towards what is now present-day St. Denis Relay, before at this time finally crossing what would have been a bridge at that time, apparently, in 1789 at Elkridge Landing, before hanging a hard left, going through downtown Elkridge, and then finally meandering away from the river after it crosses Deep Run and going up towards, Annapolis. That is either Ridge Road or Elkridge Landing Road today. Looks kind of like Ridge Road to me. I've liked Ridge Road. Just looking at it, it kind of feels like Ridge Road from my legs perspective. One thing that's interesting is that the iron furnace is actually downstream from Deep Run. If you know anything about the history of Elkridge Furnace, the present-day ruins are upstream from Deep Run, but it's showing them downstream from Deep Run. So it was also a different location originally at one time. So I thought that was kind of cool map. But one thing that this shows, and we're going to see this theme here in a second, is that this is a road that crosses the Patapsco. It does not follow the Patapsco. And very early on, as soon as Baltimore becomes established as a major transportation hub, a major commercial center, starting really in the American Revolution, yes, it started in the 1720s, but it really becomes the major port on the Chesapeake beginning of the American Revolution, all the roads go to Baltimore. And so this is a map from 1795 that shows essentially what the modern road, I mean, if you know your way around Baltimore today, all the major roads are pretty much already there by 1795. You've got, up top, you've got Frederick Road crossing by Elkridge Upper Mills, and you've got Frederick Road. And then, I don't know, should I walk with this thing, or should I? Do I dare try this?
Go.
Oh, or even am I going to be here? So yeah, so like here we go. Let's see, where am I? Okay, so you got Frederick Road, Rogers Avenue, Old Frederick Road, Rogers Avenue, Frederick Road, Columbia Pike, Montgomery Road, Route 1, either Elkridge Landing Road or Ridge Road, Hammond's Ferry Road, and Annapolis Road, all pretty much there by 1795. So, what do you see there? All the roads across the valley at about a 90-degree angle. Not too many roads going up and down the valley. Now, to be fair, this is a statewide map, so not all roads are probably shown, but all the major roads across the valley at a 90-degree angle, and guess what? They still pretty much do today, 95, 70, 40, etc. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. I hadn't really actually considered that before looking into this. So this really tells you that the valley is really a place where resources are extracted, or resources are brought to the valley, or manufactured and transported out of the valley. So that really sets the stage for how the valley was used. It's very hard to transport things through the valley, but you can certainly get them in and out, and all the roads certainly indicate that. The Patapsco Valley would have been a major source of commerce going through the valley along the Baltimore and Frederick Turnpike, which we now call Frederick Road Route 144, which went right through downtown, and still goes through downtown Atlantic City. It was the easternmost leg of the quote-unquote National Road. Now, it wasn't technically part of the National Road. The National Road went from Cumberland to Wheeling. But of all the privately owned turnpikes that connected Baltimore with the National Road, the last leg in that journey was the Baltimore and Frederick Turnpike, which terminated in Baltimore. So I have a picture of Baltimore, and that's supposed to be the National Road coming into Baltimore. The bottom left picture is actually the Frederick Turnpike in the late 19th century when it was still a turnpike. The Baltimore Frederick Turnpike was originally a publicly owned turnpike, and then was for most of the 19th century a privately owned turnpike, and then, like many of our turnpikes in the area, because most of our major roads were actually private turnpikes in the 19th century, they were bought out by the county and state governments and became state roads. They were not maintained well as private turnpikes, that's why they got bought out by the government at a different time. And the reason why I have that on there is that it really shows the connectivity and how important these corridors were at getting around. And they were very effective. For example, I have an enslaved, self-liberating advertisement for $100 an enslaved person that run away from Dorsey's Forge. I found that advertisement in the Lancaster Television Center in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So yes, they were very effective transportation corridors to get in and out of the valley. This allowed the Patapsco Valley, along with water power, to of course become a major source of industrial development in the late 18th and 19th century. And you can see here the extent. These are mid-1800s, mid-19th century artist renderings. First iron furnaces and forges in the 1750s and 1760s, then you get flour mills shortly thereafter, first local flour mills, then commercial flour mills, and then finally the big industry in Patapsco was the textile industry, which really picked up steam beginning with Avella in 1808, but very quickly followed by several more. And you can see them. Has everybody seen this image before? Do I need to describe? You all know. If you don't know, okay, so I will explain what's going on with it. So the first one here at the right is the Avalon Iron and Nail Works, really at its peak in what is now the Avalon area of Patapsco Valley State Park. This was a large, these are the large puddling furnaces. If you've ever been to puddling furnaces and iron forging, iron mill works, duplexes, houses, this is the railroad. We'll talk about that in a minute. If you're not familiar with the Avalon area, this is the History Center, William Walter Johnson History Center. We made the Thomas Viaduct with the monument in the background. There is some artistic license. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 arches in the painting. There are only 8 under the bridge. And then this is if you've ever gone to Ilchester and got into like a hot air balloon and went above the railroad tunnel in Ilchester and looked upstream, this is how it would have looked in the 1850s. So you've got the Patterson Viaduct, which is where the cable stay bridge is now, at the end of the Gristmill Trail. Going upriver, you have what became later Simpkins. This was this way. And then Gray's, Ellicot's Mills, which at the time had 2 flour mills, which is where the big Wilkins Roger building, the big silos are right now. The Granite Cotton Mill, originally the Elkridge Iron Works, and then eventually Owella. It's extremely long mill race, and then up here is the Daniels area. At this time, it would have been where Alberton Road, originally called Elysville. So, the Patapsco was and most of this industry, I believe, predated the railroad, which we'll talk about in a second. One of the challenges of building a trail through the valley is it's very narrow and very steep. This is a topographical image map of the Patapsco Valley, just upriver from the Route 40, present-day Route 40, and there is a view from the Hollowfield area that was taken in the 50s. It's not navigable, and there isn't a lot of space. And one of the other problems is those mills were a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, they provided a lot of good water power, but on the other hand, they all have dams and water power infrastructure, so they had mill races, and all kinds of water power infrastructure that takes up space, and they all have lakes. So what little land you have is getting gobbled up by water. And counterclockwise, that's Owella, Hockley, and Avalon. Perhaps the image that best exemplifies how narrow and tight things were in the valley is the original, this old early image of the Orange Road grist mill. Does have the railroad there, but you can see you've got the steep hillsides, you've got the railroad, you've got the mill, you've got a county road going through the mill, and then on the other side of the mill you have a dam. All squeezed in that little teeny spot right there. Another problem with Patapsco, of course, is you have lots of floods. If you ever notice, there's a lot of river roads in the Patapsco, and they don't all seem to connect very well. This is why. We had, of course, the major flood in 1868, and there was another major flood in 1972, but there have been many others. There was one in the 1930s, but of course we had a couple of really bad ones a few years ago. This has made sustaining transportation for worse, let alone buildings in the Patapsco Valley challenging. So here's a good picture of what is now the Gristmill Trail, coming to a dead stop and going underneath one of the railroad culverts in this, I think this is 1898 Bromley Atlas. And you can see the road did continue, I think actually I take that back, this is 1950, because in the 1898 Atlas it goes up to the Orange Road Mill and it stops. But either way, you can see these broken pieces of roads, and there's a lot more to The one exception to this connectivity problem was the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was America's first common carrier railroad established in the United States in 1827. The first stone was laid in 1828, and between 1828 and about 1831, it constructed its main line through the Patapsco Valley. It was named for its city of origin, Baltimore, and the Ohio River, its original intended destination, which it did eventually reach in 1853. The railroad was extremely windy. It went up the Patapsco Valley because it wanted to avoid hills as much as possible. If they could go 20 miles out of the way to avoid going over a hill, they would, because they did not realize that steam power would be viable. So they were actually literally using horses when the railroad was first built. And so they built this extremely meandering line across, up and down the Patapsco Valley. And this picture to the left kind of shows you going around a rock that used to be just upriver from Ellicott City. It's called Tarpon Rock, which was later removed. One interesting challenge that is not often talked about being a railroad in the Patapsco is where to locate it, because there were already mills in the valley when they built the railroad. So if you notice, if you you've been in the valley, most of the mills are on the opposite side of the river, the railroad. The exception being Orange Grove, Avalon, and Daniels. All the other ones, they all had bridges crossing the river, so they had to avoid the existing milling infrastructure in order to build the railroad up the valley. Nevertheless, they were successful at getting the railroad built. It has then subsequently been rebuilt. All the tunnels you see on the Old Main Line today were all built, most of them were built in the middle of the 19th century. Henryton was the mid-19th century, but was then built as Henryton in the late 19th century. But the important part about the railroad is its connectivity. This is the way people got around the valley. That is a timetable from 1937. There were 27 stops between Baltimore and Monterey on the Greenway Railroad. So for 119 years, from 1830 until 1949, December 31st, 1949, to be exact, you could take a train up and down the Patapsco Valley. So this is what really tied the valley together. And it was a valuable source for commerce, daily passenger trains, local freight, local mail, with the valley every day, multiple trains a day. More than any other form of transportation, it's the railroad that really brought the people to the valley. Baltimore was a major second point of entry for immigration, back into New York, in the late 19th century, thanks to the North German Wood Steamship Company and connection to the Greenway Railroad. So a lot of folks who got jobs in the Patapsco Valley, settled in the Patapsco Valley, came up the valley via the railroad. So that's really what stitched the valley together. So now I'm going to change gears a little bit and talk about where the park fits in this. Patapsco was Maryland's first state parkish. There was actually about 5 of them that all came online at once in the 1930s due to a bureaucratic change and they changed a bunch of places' names. Originally, it was a forest reserve, and it was established in 1907 thanks to a donation by this gentleman here named John Mark Glenn, no relation to the astronaut. John Mark Glenn, and if you've ever wondered where for those of you who are interested in history of the park, if you've ever wondered where the original 43 acres he donated in 1907 was, it's that little parcel right there. I'm assuming it's that because it was 43 acres according to the deed, according to the history, and that happens to be about 43.75 acres. And ironically, there's not very much actually on that parcel. It's basically a steep hillside full of trees. But nevertheless, he donated 43 acres to the state. About a year after 2 other people had donated 2,000 acres to the state, descendants of John Burke Garrett in Garrett County, under the condition that they would begin a Forest Service, what was then called the State Board of Forestry, to promote forest conservation in the early 20th century. One of the problems we had in the early 20th century is we had already successfully deforested a lot of the state of Maryland thanks to agriculture by the early 20th century. And then there was this new invention called chainsaw, which was really doing a good job finishing off what little forest land was left. And so there was a fear of a timber famine, a timber crisis, and so they decided, well, let's do something, let's use the power of the government to do something about this. So they created the State Board of Forestry in 1906 and appointed the State Forestry F.W. Desley. And he set about promoting forest conservation, but like I said, he came with some land management responsibilities, some land in Garrett County and here in Patapsco. In 1912, the state legislature, along with some very wealthy folks in Baltimore, at the behest of some very wealthy folks in Baltimore and Fred Desley, decided to authorize $50,000 to expand the state forest reserve to turn it into basically a city park. It was to, and I quote, preserve the scenic beauty of this region, which is recognized as one of the most beautiful in the country, unquote. It was to protect the water, protect the river, because it was used as both recreationally as well as a source of drinking water at that time. So they planted a lot of trees. To serve as a demonstration forest, so plant different types of trees and see which ones live better in this type of climate. And weren't too concerned about invasive species back then. And to, as I quote, serve as a recreation ground near large centers of population where the people may enjoy nature at its best in a region of so many natural attractions. It is proposed to offer camping sites to those who wish to take an outing here and who probably could not afford a vacation trip to more distant sections. The idea is to make a place where everyone in the state may realize it as his pleasure ground, unquote. So, thanks to $50,000 and some more generous donations, as well as some deals with some of the industries in the valley, they effectively were able to start expanding this park in the 19-teens. And this is why I call Maryland's first unofficial state park. From the beginning, Fred Vesely recognized trails as an important integral part of this new pleasure ground that the state had created, and a large number of trails were constructed largely in the Orange Grove area, what we now call the Orange Grove area, to establish campground. So where there's no camp today, there was the first campground. This is a place where white middle-class families in Baltimore could, quote-unquote, rough it pleasantly in Army-style tents along the Patapsco River. Now, remember, in the early 20th century, there was no air conditioning. Baltimore was where roughly half of Maryland's population lived at this time. And it was, you know, a lot of concrete, a lot of brick. And so going off the Patapsco Valley, which, in my experience, no one will ever confuse as a nice, dry area. It's quite humid in Patapsco. It was probably still an upgrade compared to living in the city. And so they lived in these big army tents for free, provided they knew how to follow. They were really obsessed in making sure you could start any necessary fires. Provided that you could live, that you could start at 70 fires, and that you could not cut any trees down. You could live there for free with your family. In fact, many people actually lived in the valley and commuted to the city by train or by car. But this was not roughing it. This was really glamping in a lot of ways, as we recognize today. They had electricity wired to the bloody band. One family was playing piano. This was not roughing it as we would think of. But nevertheless, I do remember having an opportunity in Anchorage, I remember this, talking to one person who actually grew up in the 1920s in this area. Her name was Elaine Hamilton O'Neill, and she said that her family actually brought her family's piano out to the park. So definitely not roughing it like on the Appalachian Trail. By the early 1920s, the reserve was effectively 2,500 acres. In reality, the state only owned about 800 or so. But thanks to other arrangements, it was effectively about 2,500 acres. And as the reserve grew ever more popular, the need for more access and trails became apparent. And even in 1919, Vesely began to write his annual reports, we need to build more trails and more sustainable roads. Nevertheless, this was very successful. As Vesely wrote, the use of the Patapsco forest has been exceedingly popular and demonstrates in a most inclusive manner that state forests, while serving their primary purpose for timber production, that's what its priors were, may also serve other important uses such as camping and the enjoyment of getting outdoors in natural surroundings. These are some cool pictures of trails like the Cascade Trail I had found a few years ago. These are actually probably from the 1930s. Initially, the best way to get to the park was by train. In fact, being a railroad in the teens and 20s adjusted their schedule to accommodate those seeking to camp in the Patapsco Valley. However, after World War II, and as this photo to the left of the Hutzler camp, Hutzler department store camp indicates, people were becoming more and more used to driving out to the park. But nevertheless, you could get there by train in the early days. But it became a priority to begin improving vehicular access. Now, at this time, Patapsco was largely looked upon as an extension of the city park system. In the early 20th century, Baltimore had gone through its own sort of urban revival and had actually hired the Olmsted brothers to design a plan for the city of Baltimore's park system, and they kind of included Patapsco and the Gunpowder Valley as satellites to that. And so connecting Patapsco to the city was of the utmost importance. And this included the proposal to build a parkway, or a large road, directly from the city line up the Patapsco through Elkridge City up to Hollowfield. This was never built, but it did make it to the local newspaper, the Baltimore Sun. In the Great Depression, in addition to building the first modern park facilities, the CCC also built a new road up in the Hollowfield area. Ironically, it's not a major road today. If you've ever gone to the campground at Hollowfield, or you've ever driven Park Road just north of Elkridge City, you have driven on the CCC built road. However, it is separated by a section in the middle that's no longer the road. But nevertheless, the automobile, this really illustrates the automobile age was here, and that we were going to build facilities to accommodate the car. In the late 1940s, they really tried to build a highway through the valley. There was a proposal to basically ring the entire city of Baltimore with parkways, including a parkway up the Patapsco Valley that would connect into Reisterstown Road. And that's what the drawing of that. Sorry, it's not very good black and white Xerox, but thankfully, it was determined that building such a road was unfeasible. So, by 1950, the Maryland State Planning Commission came up with a master plan, the first master plan to develop the Patapsco Valley as a full-scale park. And so this is a very top-down plan. The Maryland State Planning Commission was created during the Depression to implement New Deal programming, and by the 1950s, they were really interested in developing plans for parks. They developed a statewide park plan 2 years later in 1952, but the first one they did was for the Patapsco Valley itself. I should point out, this was done by the Planning Commission and not by the Department of Forests and Parks, because the Department of Forests and Parks at the time strictly employed foresters and knew nothing about how to plan anything. So this is an outside entity working with the parks to develop a plan. And this is, I love this one, this is called the Wheel Recreation Center. That was going to be in largely the Fort Ponds area. It called for establishing a park between Baltimore City Line and Liberty Reservoir in Sykesville. It would increase the park to about 8,500 acres with an emphasis on developed facilities. And about 60 miles of trails and 75 miles of bridle paths. Emphasis was heavily placed on these developed facilities. Here you can see an artist rendering of a dance hall that was going to be in an area around Lansdowne. The green area with around field plans like this, lots of bird sanctuaries. There's no put it all in, there's no at all. However, this never really came to pass for two reasons. One, the foresters lacked the horsepower to really be able to plan this, to really implement this in terms of development, but they did succeed in actually acquiring the land. So the one thing that came out of this was the park did increase in size starting after this date. And they started developing their first developed facilities. The one thing I want to point out before I go off this, though, is that they recognized very quickly, even after the Parkway plans died, that it was going to be very hard to connect the valley together by road. But they tried. They decided to not connect the entire valley with one road, but they decided to use two roads and cut the valley in half. So they were going to have one contiguous road from the city line to about Ellicott City. Then there was going to be a break, and then they were going to buy all of this land north of Ellicott City and connect it by another park road. So they still had automobiles in mind, but not quite as, but not highways at least. Now, the other thing, in addition to new land, and I said land was acquired largely thanks to a forester named Carl Pfeiffer. The land increased to about 3,000 acres by 1960 and about 7,000 acres by 1970. And Patapsco is now about 16,000 acres. It's the second largest state park in Maryland. Thanks largely to program open space, which was built in 1969. The first modern developed areas of the park that you would call, so this kind of park chart, developed areas means a place where you have local buildings and parking lots and bathrooms. The first developed areas appeared in the early 1950s, except that the CCC was built one in the 30s. But Avalon, Orange Grove, Filton, and Hollowfield were all built with these pavilions that you see here. That's actually the Avalon pavilion that was washed away by Agnes. So it looked just like 106, 300, and 201 if you're familiar with the park. These were the first developed facilities that were really dedicated to automobile access. And I should point out that the Hilton area was developed as the park's first officially built segregated area. So there was an unofficial segregated area in the park starting about 1940, perhaps earlier. But in 1952-53, when they began to build these official areas that were these first sort of more modern park facilities, the Hilton area was set up as the official African American area. And it really fit a pattern that unfortunately was established at Sandy Point, where if you're going to have swimming and black people, well, you need to either have a separate place for black people to swim, or you don't let them swim. So they put it up at the top of the hill, and they did not let them go down the trails to the river. They were sent to that river. Now, it was only implemented for a couple of years. Later park managers tried to continue to implement it. That's another story. But nevertheless, it was not segregated for very long. Officially, it was desegregated by 1956. But it does kind of provide a little window into how many other park areas would have been developed in Patapsco and statewide had that been allowed to persist. In the interim, before 1980, there were a couple of interesting ideas to try to connect the valley together. One of them was the River of History Tour, which was a historic tour led by the park interpreter at the time. No, it wasn't Jerry Sawyer. Oh gosh, isn't that a shame? I know it's gone. Anyway, there's a picture of him there. Leading a tour at the time was by this was a bus tour that went up and down the Patapsco Valley. It was very widely advertised and considered very successful. Jim Rogers. And then another interesting oddball is this attempt to bring the visually impaired into the park. They established what was called the Braille Trail up in the McKeldin area in 1972. It was meant to have a series of interpretive signs in Braille with a bunch of ropes that would go from station to station to try to get those who couldn't see out into the park. I don't know if the Braille Trail is still there, but nevertheless, these are a couple of attempts to increase access to the park through interpretation and bringing in those who would otherwise not normally be able to enjoy the park. Now, the one thing about Patapsco in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s is that it was a contiguous and yet balkanized park. One thing that's interesting is that it is fairly contiguous. If you compare it to, say, Gunpowder Falls State Park, which is very balkanized. They have a plot of land here, and there's a bunch of land where it's all private. And there's another spot up here, and there's another spot over here. It's all over the place. It's not contiguous. Thankfully, because they decided to start buying land at Patapsco really in earnest in the 1950s, they beat the suburban sprawl. So they were able to actually acquire a fair amount of key land along the valley floor before the suburban subdivisions really got going. Gunpowder was so lucky. Gunpowder wasn't even started until 1959. So on the one hand, it's a very contiguous park. On the other hand, it's a very balkanized park because you've got all these little isolated areas. So this is a map from about 1980 that shows you all the individual areas. And to give you an idea of how non-contiguous Patapsco is, if you've ever worked in Patapsco, if you want to go from one part of Patapsco to the other, you would inevitably have to leave Patapsco in order to achieve that. It's the same thing if you're a first New York Park visitor. Tying this valley together has been a challenge. Now, in the 1970s, there was some transitions. First of all, and that, by the way, that one photo was my one stock photo. That is not actually of hikers in Patapsco. It's kind of a photo of hikers in the 70s. People's recreational habits began to change starting in the 70s. Yes, there were still people who would take part of the park, and yes, there was still emphasis on picnicking and going and doing picnicking into formal picnic areas and so forth. But you started seeing people who wanted to use trails and get outside more and more what we call passive recreation. The valley began to change. You, of course, had the major tropical storm Agnes in 1972, which decimated a lot of the valley. It took out a good chunk of River Road, really severing River Road from Elkridge to Elkridge City. It put the Daniels plant out of business. The Oella mill was not destroyed by Agnes. It actually went out of business about a month before Agnes, but nevertheless, that mill also closed down in 70. But it really forced the valley to have to change how it was going to be used in a lot of ways and how it was going to be accessed. I have this photo top right. That is Orange Grove before Agnes. The top left building there actually is the former park headquarters where the restroom in Orange Grove across the Missouri Bridge is now located. This photo was taken when the road still went through the Elkridge City. So that gives you an idea of the volume of traffic that used to go through the park. In fact, it was the busiest park in the year. Their visitation numbers, I think, were comparable to what they are today because they used to count every car driving down the road as a park visitor. So anyway, that may not be true, but I think I was take that. So take that for what it's worth. So that leads us to our second master plan, which is technically on the books our current master plan from 1981. This one was less top-down. They decided to talk to some citizens. They formed a citizens committee, and they worked with park planners from what was then called the Capital Programs Administration to create this plan, which was supposed to be only good for 20 years. Here we are almost 40 years, over 40 years later, and we're still technically, this is the one that's on the book. It was meant to serve as a guide, not as an absolute prescription to quote the plan. It's had four unifying elements. It had the river, it had nature, it had history, and he planned 77-mile trail to connect the entire park together. It was called a multi-use trail. I'm not quite sure what this trail was supposed to be, but it just says in the plan multi-use. It's supposed to be for hikers, bikers, and horseback riders. Now, mountain biking wasn't really a thing in 1981, so I don't know if they meant mountain biking trails. I have a feeling they probably just meant more, hybrid style, what we would call hybrid style biking. But it's an odd mixture, because in some ways, by the standards of the 70s, this plan's ambitious. Let me rephrase that. By our standards today, this plan is very ambitious. By the standards of the 70s, it's actually not that bad. It did call for a lot of developed areas. This is Hillport Ponds to the left. This is, I believe, what we now where the Horse Center is now, off of Frederick Road, just outside of Elkridge City. You can see they have pavilions and so forth. Lots of pavilions, lots of developed areas. So we're still very much doing the developed area thing. But the thing that's cool about this plan is you see that dotted line that runs through, that's supposed to be the multi-use trail that ties the valley together. There's a couple more from that second master plan. It does have a golf course. I don't know why the planners back in the 60s and 70s loved golf courses. They tried to put a golf course in every single master plan we saw. And And even when they didn't include them, like in the Susquehanna Plan in '79, they even wrote an explanation as to, sadly, we couldn't include our golf course. But nevertheless, they wanted to put a golf course in every one, and there's one here too. But nevertheless, it gives you an idea of the scale. Now, it's kind of a good thing this didn't happen. The reason why this didn't happen is because by the 70s and 80s, they began to run out of money. And because they were really good at buying land, but they weren't so very good at staffing the park, and they weren't so very good at being able to develop the parks. And it's good because, at least if you're like me, I like going out into trees and nature, and I don't necessarily want to see a pavilion at every turn and a parking lot at every turn. So the lack of funding and really has set the stage for the park we have today, because now we have opportunities for more passive recreation. Yes, there is demand for more developed facilities that are going to park on weekends in recent years, but nevertheless, the park is what it is today, thanks in large part to for us failing to achieve our plans and visions. One thing I want to say about the park to close and turn this over to Dave is that there has been an dramatic increase in park visitation since about 2000. We had about 575,000 visitors in 2000. We had just over 1 million in 2018. We had 1.5 million visitors 2 years ago in 2022. So we're having a lot more visitors. The user groups have become a lot more diverse. And this is why we need to have a much larger and much more sustainable trail system. And this trail system, in many ways, once it's fully realized, now it won't be exactly the same, but this new trail system really, this new revised, updated, connected trail system really has the potential to stitch the valley and the park together in a way that has not been seen since December 31st, 1949, when the last big passenger train pulled out of town area. Now, I'm going to turn it over to, there it is.
All right, let's talk about trails. I'm Ferraro. I'm Executive Director of Friends of Patapsco Valley State Park. I prefer not to use the mic if I could. Can you guys hear me? Over here? Okay.
Just speak loudly, you're good.
Okay. I'll speak louder. Thank you, PHG, for having me here today. I see a ton of people in the audience that I've already seen 3 times this week at breweries and bike races. And Rob, it's been wonderful to work with you. Fascinating. I learned so much about Patapsco this week, and you're a cool guy. I appreciate it very much. Let's hear it for Rob. Okay, let's talk about where we are with trails in the park right now. So this is going to be a little bit more conversational. I don't have a script prepared, so feel free to raise your hand and ask questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. So where we've been. So Patapsco, as Rob kind of alluded to, is kind of broken into 5 areas. And those areas are generally what we call the developed areas of the park. That's where there are parking lots and bathrooms and contact stations. These areas pretty much are Avalon, Hilton, Hollowfield, Pickall, and McKelvin. I stuck Daniels in there because everybody thinks that's a developed area, but it's really not. Daniels, although very busy, there's no bathrooms there, there's no place to park, and I think you all see the impact that's going on in the Daniels area right now. The trail networks in the past were basically localized to areas where there was a neighborhood or a place to park. So even though the park was contiguous, the trail systems were tight little trail systems that were tied to neighborhoods. And the trails basically were unplanned. These trails led to areas of interest. People wanted to go to the river, they wanted to go to historic sites, they wanted to go to natural features. These trails, we call those legacy trails or desired trails, sometimes called social trails. These trails are generally unplanned, and people want to get somewhere, and they move to them. Here's some stock 70s photos too. Well, I couldn't find it easily. But even though we had these localized trail systems, we did have a contiguous park. People, they moved through the park really by the river. You could walk along the river, you could take a boat through the river, you could kayak, and there is another long corridor through the park. It's a strictly no trespassing corridor, but everyone uses it. Who knows what that is? Yes, there is a path that goes the entire length of the park is the CSX tracks. But even though people weren't connecting the park, the hardy folks were. People were figuring out how to get from one section to another. They were doing that socially. So we did have some connections between these localized trail systems. That all changed when mountain biking started. Who watched mountain biking arrive at Patapsco? There we go. Right, yeah. Mountain biking totally changed Patapsco Valley State Park. When it got there, users automatically could move much more rapidly through the park. They had this conveyance, and they wanted to connect the trail system and get more trails. And these early days of mountain biking brought a lot of conflict. We had our legacy users who weren't sure about these mountain bikers. And that early conflict really brought a lot of organized trail development to the park. These mountain bikers got together, they formed committees, and they formed groups, and they worked on the trail systems. And they would learn. In the rest of the United States, the mountain bikers were having problems everywhere. They were working with communities and with park systems, trying to figure out how to use the trails. Early mountain bikers, significant early advocacy. They had a DIY approach. A lot of these mountain bikers came from, I would say, alternative sports and alternative viewpoints. So they got together and they really did have a strong sense of community. And they had a sophisticated approach. They had a willingness to contribute, not just in their user group. They worked outside of their user group, they did donating across park programs, and they became invested in the park systems. And mountain biking got popular very quickly, particularly at Patapsco Valley State Park. As mountain biking got popular at Patapsco, we had 4 nonprofit organizations sort of come together. More is the local mountain bike organization. They're basically sort of centered in Northern Virginia, but they got a quick foothold in Patapsco. IMBA is, oops, that's a typo, sorry about that. IMBA is the National Mountain Bike Association, the International Mountain Bike Association. About this time, the Friends of Patapsco Valley State Park was formed, and PHG was formed. So we had these 4 concurrent NPOs that were congealing, and there was a confluence of nonprofit organizations in the Patapsco Valley. There's a kid. So as these organizations came to be, and things really got moving with nonprofits in the Patapsco Valley, we had some real pillars of community. Who knows Kit? Who knew Kit? Kit Valentine had a vision for the Patapsco Valley. He had a vision for connectivity. He thought about how we could make this valley, and he was really foundational. Not only did he have these brilliant ideas, but Kit was a very magnetic person. He really knew how to build community. And in my mind, he is one of the most important people in the Patapsco Valley. But there's more. Eric Crawford. Eric Crawford, early captain of MOORE, the Mid-Atlantic Off-Road Enthusiast, and he was an early organizer of the mountain bike community. Of course, this gentleman, Preserve Goella, really wanted the trail system to go all the way through the Patapsco Valley. And just a visionary. Oops. Oh shit, I didn't stop. Darn it. That's it. No more visionary. So with that, with these early people, these nonprofits, we started to see the seeds of early planning for a contiguous trail system through the Patapsco Valley. And we had some early things happen. We had the Grist Mill Trail get built, we had the Patterson Viaduct get built, and then the Patapsco Regional Greenway Plan. Everybody's pretty familiar with the Patapsco Regional Greenway Plan, I hope? Okay, very good. Okay, so that's it. The planning of the trail system was almost fully done by outside groups. This was not being done at the Maryland Park Service. This was not being done at DNR. We had nonprofit groups, we had pressure from the community working on these trail systems. And this is so key. Rob talked about this. We were working under a master plan that was made in 1981. I mean, that's just absolutely astounding for a park that's been this successful. So as this advocacy community is maturing, we're starting to see fundamental changes at Friends. Friends was an organization that was really built to preserve the Offutt Johnson History Center. And there's some folks in here who did that tonight. Where's Paul? Very good. There you are. Paul was key in starting Friends of Patapsco Valley State Park. But soon, new board members jumped into Friends, new mission, and a real emphasis about the trail system. Today's Friends, very different. So today, our mission is really to work on stewardship of the park. And what we do is we support the park. We do not wag the dog. We do only what the park wants to do. But we did have, I think a lot of you probably saw this, there was a new emphasis, new energy, some new branding, and Friends really has changed in the past few years. We are 26 years old. We are the DNR affiliated organization. So Friends operates under an affiliated agreement with DNR. So we're the official nonprofit. We're 501c3, and we have 2 employees. Our second employee is here tonight. She got hired last week. That's here for Carrie. Woo! One of the really unique things about Friends is we have offices at park headquarters. That's very unusual for a Friends group. And it's a really testament to the progressiveness of the Park Service and the people at Patapsco. The other thing is Friends is the only Friends is the only Friends group in the Maryland Park Service with paid employees. We're the only we're the only group not staffed solely by volunteers. All right, that was my little tip of the hat to Rob to do a little history. Super compressed, any questions? Good, let's keep going. Our trail system today. So, the trail system in Patapsco, 240 miles of trails. That's an astounding amount of trails. Over the past 10 years, Friends has done 25,000 volunteer hours at the park. That's a major investment in volunteer work. Most of the work on the Patapsco trail system has been done by Friends and partner NPOs. There's very little resources in the Maryland Park Service and DNR to work on the trail system. So this effort has fully come from the nonprofit organizations. And one thing that's really unique is that our trail system and our programming are a result of our partnership with the Maryland Park Service. We work with them every day and we work under their direction. We've completely rebuilt the trail system. I mean, y'all know it. It's so good. We've completely rebuilt it. So all the trails in Patapsco are multi-use with a few exceptions. There are some hiker-only trails, but it's substantially multi-use, and they're all built with sustainability as the primary focus. So as we build trails, we are building trails that are going to be there for decades. Our focus is on connectivity and moving users through the park. That is the emphasis. We do not want people hanging out in one area. We want them moving to the less busy areas of Patapsco. And all the trails are approved by DNR. There's no trails in the park that we just build. There's a rigorous review process before we build trails. The process of building trails. So when we identify trails that need to be built or closed or modified, it's really about environmental sustainability or desired connectivity. We have to close some trails that are unsustainable. We do want to move people through the valley. And sometimes we build trails for a specific need. We're doing that a lot now. We're doing it with our adaptive trails. We've done that with the schools out at Dept in the Kickall area. As we identify these trails, concurrently, fundraising begins and volunteer teams are identified. Again, the development of trails in Patapsco is not being driven by a park budget. So how does this happen? We flag an initial corridor, we pin flag it, we GPS track it, and then we submit it for review. The plan set. I want to take a minute and look at this. Kyla, could you click on this link right here? We get a lot of questions about how trails are built in the park. So, let's see. Yeah, that's good. Well, we can do this.
Oops, I'm not connected to the internet.
Okay. Shall we wait or shall we go? Okay.
One moment.
The plan set's really important. You know, there are a lot of people in the Patapsco Valley right now that are building social trails, building trails for their neighborhood, building unpermitted trails. And that's really not cool. The trail system, the way we build trails is through this DNR plan set. Once we've identified a trail corridor, this is what's established. And kind of, if you can just scroll up kind of slowly. First, if any of your engineers or architects or landscape architects, this is in your vernacular. So we identify, in the corridor, we identify the major geographic sections, come on up. And then those are spelled out piece by piece about what we're doing in the park. Keep going. We have our satellite imagery next. So what you're looking at here, this is kind of interesting. We did just open a major new trail, the OEC connector. This is the plan set for the OEC connector. It is, it's very complex. The way we align trails, the way we build trails, they really do thread through private property. They're on the contour in certain sections, and it's as much science as art when you build trails in the park. Okay, go a little further, please. Regulations, best management practices. And every plan set, when we build a trail at the park, we go through and we do examples of existing conditions of how we're going to build a trail in the park. Keep going, Kyla. More BMPs, best management practices, specifications for contractors, contour, keep going. Okay, this is interesting. In the park now, we have 2 approved engineering plans, one for bridges and one for kiosks. Initially, when we were building trails in the park, we would do this ad hoc. We'd say, okay, we want a bridge here, we make a design. Or we want a kiosk here, and we have a design. So we have now paid engineers, so we have ready to go designs on all the bridges, so we can drop them in on any trail mission. Keep going. And I think it just gets a little bit, this is interesting. This is outlining the bridge lines on the OEC connector. Really thorough review by MDE. MDE comes out a lot, they're looking at what we're going to do. There's real firm specifications about how you can build bridges in the park. Anyway, so tell your people, when you see a trail in the park, there's a lot of work that goes into building a trail. Right now in the park, we're paying about, in volunteer time and sometimes contractual, a mile of trail in the park is about $35,000. All right, well, that's me. Our other guiding documents, best practices. So we use the MPS, Maryland Park Service best practices, and all the signage in the park is with the signage and wayfinding standards. That's really important. We are very careful about our language, about our font size, and how we talk to the public and how they experience the trail system. Just talking a little bit about our bridges and kiosks. Again, these are ready to go. They're in the bag. We're ready to build these in the park. Bridges in the park, depending on their location, are $10,000 to $12,000. Kiosks are $7,000. So, we're building trails, but really what we're building is community. And really that's been the success of Friends. This large community of people are helping us. Our guiding principles, our inclusion and equity. I think we've all seen that at the park. This new community of people that's very diverse and very involved in the park. Safety, of course. Stewardship, community investment, DNR approval, 100% DNR approval, 100% DNR approval, and of course fun. Here's some glamour shots of Joe. This is the construction of the Bloody Dam connector. When the Bloody Dam was removed, we built a new trail on the Howard County side. That was from the Cascade Trail all the way to Ilchester Road. Who's been on that trail? Who's had a terrible time on that trail with her husband? You knew that was coming. More glamour shots. These are in clouds. This is a trail building tool that's adapted from forestry and firefighting. These are the tools we use to build trails in the park. Trail building is fun. It's really hard work, but it's a fantastic community exercise. A lot of work happens with the Mountain Club of Maryland. There's some MCM volunteers. All right, I tried to put this together today. It was nearly impossible. The amount of trail work that's happened in Patapsco in the past 10 years is absolutely, probably more than any park in America. We have touched every part of the trail system. So I made a list of trails here. Ridge Trail Extension, Captain John Smith, Valley View, Garrett's Pass, Bloody and the Bloody Extension, Soapstone, Buzzards Rock, Graysville, Rockhaven, Pickdall, Schools Outlook, Dogwood Connector, OEC Connector, Old Ranger, Daniels Loops Through Trail, there's our D1 council person, building trails. Daniel Switchblade more in the middle of the biggest one, etc. We are building trails here at the park. Our best guess on metrics right now, and it is a guess, is we've done about 25,000 volunteer hours. We've constructed 20 miles of new trail, modified or improved 75, and we closed trail. One of the big things we do at the park, and many people don't know, is as we're building new trail, we close on sustainable trail. So when you're out in the park and you approach a trail that used to be there and it's closed, it's because it was unsustainable and we built a new connection. Direct spend. Friends has put $500,000 in direct spend and about $880,000 in volunteer time. And there's people in this room that have been there and been at this Trail Work Days. John, what would you say about Trail Work Day?
They're hard.
Yeah, they are.
Very satisfying though. It's amazing how much you get done in one day.
Yeah.
You start in the morning and it looks like this insurmountable task. 100 people show up. I think you still keep it at 100. 100 people show up, and by the end of the day, you are a mile into the trail.
Yes, you are a mile in the trail. You know, and our trail days are popular, not only because we community build, because we generally have the best t-shirts and the best breweries and pizza sponsoring our trail days. Okay, so I picked 6 trail projects that I thought were impactful. All of these trail projects are impactful, but I picked 6 that I thought we could talk about very briefly. The first one I want to talk about is the Valley View Trail. The Valley View Trail is a trail, I'm going to show you a map in a second, but it's adjacent to the Ridge Trail on the Howard County side in the Avalon area. This is the first project we did that opened a hiker trail for all users. This trail was an incredibly important trail for the park because it was the first time when the hiking community and the cycling community said we are one trail community. And we worked together and we opened the Valley View for all users. So this gentleman right here, he was the slide I didn't have. I forgot Janine, but I want to point out Bob Grossman. Probably many of you know Bob. Bob was a leader of the mountain club for years, and Bob was also a cyclist, and Bob was really visionary about breaking these groups apart and putting them back together as one trail community. So the Valley View Trail was a mountain club trail, and we opened it to all users. It really set the bar for early cooperation, and it really showed us this too. Kids love our events. At our Trail Work Days, there's tons of kids. And this is a particularly good photo because these are my kids, Singer and Mila, and trust and believe, they don't look like that anymore. They're fully grown. So that was a while ago. Great trail. Who's hiked Valley View or ridden Valley View? Yeah, good stuff. Valley View Trail is here. I don't have a pointer, so you folks over there won't see me do this, but here's a ridge, right here, and then Valley View comes off of it and goes on the contour with absolutely beautiful views of the Patapsco River Valley.
There is a pointer
Oh, is there?
on
Oh. Valley View.
Come on.
Down here is 104, 105. These are the pavilions in Avalon. Cool. Garrett's Pass, another major trail project in the park. The Cascade Trail, one of the busiest trails in the park, a lot of user conflict. So we worked with the park. This was different than Valley View. Valley View was an existing trail that opened to all users. But the Garrett's Pass was a whole new trail build. And this was the birth of these giant trail work days at Patapsco Valley State Park. Initially, and John referenced this, we would leave our trail work days open to all comers. But we were routinely getting like 200 people at trail work days. And that's really what happened at Garrett's Pass. We exploded in volunteerism. This was a brand new trail, and it was a brand new connection to the Howard County communities and to the skills park we just built, the Rockland Branch Skills Park. Friends didn't build that, but some people in the cycling community built the skills park. Incredibly popular, as you all know, it got so popular that Howard County did close all the parking on Landing Road because it became one of the major trailheads, the Garrett's Pass Trail. But yeah, this thing really changed the way we dealt with sponsors and the way we dealt with the community. So Garrett's Pass, here's Landing Road, and Cascade goes straight down, almost up the Fall Line Trail. But Garrett's does this beautiful, gorgeous, amazing trail. It comes all the way down to 106. Good stuff, Garrett's Pass. The Grays Mill Trail, completed pretty recently. This was a response to the flood of 2018. In 2018, River Road was closed, and that major gap between the lower part of Patapsco and Ellicott City was closed. So we had a ton of people who started just socially move through the contour, and this trail was starting to happen. So the park responded to that, and we did a brand new trail, the Grays Mill Trail. But one of the things that's important about Grays Mill is it really did give birth to our trail captain program. So now in the park, We have a specific volunteer per geographic area, and they are trained, first aid trained, chainsaw certified, and they can go out and do some discrete trail work days with small groups. We don't need to do these giant trail work days anymore. We have trail captains. And that was really because of COVID. We couldn't have large groups anymore. Brand new trail, heavily used, and it got our natural surface trails closer to downtown Ellicott City. This trail, I hope some of you had the opportunity to hike this. This trail goes from South Hilltop Road, which is near the Buzzards Trail, all the way over here through this area of the park, the Grays Mill area, crosses Thistle, up here's Dimitri's, or Atlantic, as it were. And then you come all the way down on this beautiful contour, high above the river here, all the way out to the Cycle Mill Bike Shop.
Yes, Dave Sales.
And there's mine. Pardon? You're welcome. So who's done Grays Mill? Yeah, excellent. That's a good one, isn't it? Grays Mill Trail. Big project for the park, big project for the mountain bike community, the Schools Out Loop. Mountain biking in the park is huge, but what really took off about 5 years ago is high school mountain biking. Every high school in the Patapsco Valley has a mountain bike team now. And we have just, I mean, it's amazing. The mountain bikers who are now from like 7 to 15 years old. It's really changed the complexion of cycling in the valley, and definitely we've got high hopes for stewardship, because these people, these young people, are not only riding in the park, but they're coming to our trail work days. They're the next people who are going to drive development and sustainability in the park. So in the Pickall area, what we did is we built an event loop. It's a 3.5-mile loop. It's called the Schools Out Trail. It's half machine built, half hand built. It's brand new trail. Why is it in Pickall? Because Pickall is closed. People are, we hear complaints that Pickall's closed, but it's great that Pickall's closed, because it's the only place in Patapsco Valley State Park where we can have events anymore. Patapsco Valley State Park is too busy for events. But in the Pickall area, you can do it. You can do it for a couple reasons. There's pavilions, there's parking, there's bathrooms, and it's sort of isolated up there. You don't have a lot of conflict with other users. Not only are we having night races, they're having Trail Fest, the Punisher Mountain Bike Series, the Mini Pedals Camps, MMB Rides, the Johnny Cake Jolt, and the NICA State Finals. Anybody been up there and checked out the Schools Out Loop? Yeah, mountain bikers mostly, right, yeah. Here's the Schools Out Loop. Here are the big pavilions. The Schools Out Loop goes over here, brand new machine-built trail, down the power line, crosses, goes back here, and then back up to the pavilions. This loop, at any point, you can get a gator out to somebody who's injured. So we had injuries, last week at the 6 hours. We had a major extraction at the 6 hours of Woodstock race. It's tough to get people out of the park when they're hurt. Here it's not. Here we can get ambos back there, we can get stretchers back there, we can get people out of the park. It's a unique facility, and we're lucky to have it. The Adaptive Trail at Tall Poplar. It's no secret that we are building adaptive trails and doing adaptive programs in the park. The first one we did was the 1.5-mile adaptive trail in the McKeldin area. It is the first adaptive trail in the Maryland Park System. There are no other purpose-designed adaptive trails. The adaptive programs, I put here that to reset the trajectory of our organization, because our adaptive programs are so popular now that people think of Friends as an adaptive organization. They've gotten huge. We've had partnerships that we didn't anticipate. We have underwriting now from Kennedy Krieger and the Veterans Administration. We have sponsors that are related to healthcare and accessibility, more than just the typical outdoor industry. So adaptive is happening at the park. We decided to really invest in this and walk the walk, and it has brought us a whole new group of supporters. So the Tall Poplar Trail is right here. Here are the basketball courts in McKeldin. And you come down here and you make a 1.5-mile loop. This is all built to adaptive standards. Another thing about this is another great partnership with our friends from the Mountain Club of Maryland. They were the caretakers of that trail. They were the stewards of that trail. And we said, we want to make this adaptive trail. And they said, hell yes, we want it to. Because our adaptive trails, they're fantastic for mountain bikers, but they're great for hikers too. And they're really good if you have a diverse group of hikers, if you've got people of different ages. The trail tread is much more mellow, it's wider, and it's typically a little bit easier. But I have to say, these are not accessible trails. These are adaptive trails. These are real forest experiences, and they're work. The OEC Connector, our newest trail. Who's been on the OEC Connector? All right. It's so good. This is a long coming project. We've been working on this project for about 7 years. We knew we wanted to connect the informal trail town of OEC with the Hollowfield campground. If you were trying to get from OEC into our trail system, you had to go up that Park Drive, terrible times, on the old CCC roads. This new connection is absolutely spectacular. It's unbelievably nice trail. And one of the things it does is it goes over the CSX line now. So we built this trail up over the tunnel near the Union Dam. That's something we're doing a lot now. We're working with CSX and Operation Lifesaver. A lot of the legacy trails in this park go across the train tracks. We're really working to eliminate that. We'll never be able to do it. Don't tell CSX I said that out loud. But we're working hard to get these trails away from the train tracks. One of the things that's so cool about this trail, too, is we've worked with the Elkridge City Partnership, and we're putting dedicated parking areas in the old courthouse at the top of Elkridge City. So this is one of the first times that we're going to have park furniture outside of the park. There's such a demand for parking. We're going to use the courthouse at the top of the city. Yeah, so this had it in 2 maps. But here, this is park headquarters right here. You go through the field, you go down, you go underneath the Route 40 bridge. I kind of missed it there. And then underneath the Route 40 bridge, up here on the OEC connector, all the way to the campground. The Hollowfield campground is a very busy campground. It's sold out nonstop. We are seeing people camping at the campground now and walking into Ellicott City and going to the judge's bench and then coming back to go to sleep. We are seeing people come in and then go to the Phoenix. We had a feeling this would work, but it is super successful thus far. I guess about 2 months it's been open now. Anyway, you get to the campground, and then you come down here and you make this really, really sweet contour trail, way up high. Amazing views of Oella here. Kind of grown in right now, but in the winter, it's just spectacular. And it comes down here and goes to Sylvan Lane. We worked very closely with Howard County Highways to re-sign Sylvan Lane for all new signs, because these folks on Sylvan Lane, they're very supportive. They're big-time trail users, and they, like us, were nervous that we were going to have a parking lot on Sylvan Lane. It's been going pretty good. If you're out there in the community, spread the word. No parking on Sylvan Lane. Some more glamour shots of the opening we just had there a couple months ago. Questions, comments about trails? Go.
I would like to understand the difference between an unsustainable trail and a sustainable trail.
Okay, good. So again, it's art and science. That plan set that I showed you a lot of examples of how sustainable trails are built. So sustainable trails generally do not follow a fall line. They don't go down a hill. We don't want water on the trail to gather and erode. We generally build them up on the contour. So they're longer. They may go along the contour. Also, they're built in a way where they are outsloped. So when the water hits them, the water runs off of the trail and not along the trail. We do things like put in grade reversals. So when people are on the trail, hiking or running or cycling, they have this experience, and I think probably many of you experience this on our trails, the old trails as compared to the new trails. The new trails are much more undulated, many more curves, grade reversals, so water will not run on them. Also, when we build a sustainable trail, we dig down to the mineral soil. We dig down past the organic soil to the mineral soil. That stuff doesn't erode. That's just an overview. There's a ton of resources out there about sustainable trail. It's a lot of work, but they're better trails every time. Good question. Michelle?
You talk a lot about new trail, which is awesome. You glossed over closing trail. Is trail density a concern? Do you guys have a ceiling?
Well, you know, that's a great question. We do have a ceiling, but it's really about the geography. The Patapsco Valley is skinny. It is, you know, we can't go wide. We have to go along the river corridor. So there's not too much that can be built along the corridor. There are areas like Pickall and Woodstock that are seeing broader development. But let me touch on that in a second. Rob hinted on it, I'm going to bring it up again too, about a master plan for this park. Right now we're building trail basically in sections, as opposed to like a master plan that really looks at what type of recreation facilities we want to put in there. You obviously have some trail building experience.
So is there any thought of connecting the different areas within the park?
They're fully connected.
They are.
Yes. The park is fully connected now. You can ride your bike from downtown Sykesville all the way to Harbor Hospital. Now, some of those areas are not fully formalized. There's still social trail, but you can absolutely do it. There's only one area in our trail system that's not contiguous. Who knows who it is? What it is? Come on, we all know it. It's Elkridge City. That's the only place in the Patapsco Valley where the park doesn't own all the land, either on one side or both sides of the valley. But I think things are going to happen there. Certainly, there's a lot of talk about the future of River Road between Frederick and the Simpkins site. We've got the Wilkins-Rogers Mill that's going to see some kind of redevelopment, and we just built a trail to downtown Elkridge City. So, will we have a natural surface trail? No, but I think the connectivity is just years away.
Why was all the parking removed from Winchester and Long Bridge? Right
So-
there at the footbridge.
So those roads are there's several things going on there. On Ilchester Road is a Howard County road. That is not park property. Howard County closed that. On the Baltimore County side of the road, that's all private property owned by the Simpkins Corporation. So they closed all of that. So those were closed by entities not related, well, cooperatively with the Park Service. We closed it because the environmental impacts and the safety, we worked with them to close it because the environmental impacts and the safety situations down there got so bad that it needed to be closed. But you see now, people are still parking there illegally, nonstop. Those people will be towed and ticketed.
Is there any hope of getting parking? And there's so much space there that some of that land we use.
Yeah, we're going to look at that in 1 second. But let me ask you, what do you need for a parking lot? Bathrooms and staff. That's what you need for a parking lot. All right.
Hey, question?
Yep.
250 miles of trails.
Mm-hmm.
What are the best sources for up-to-date information on those trails?
Here we go. Get there.
On the trail, yeah.
You guys are anticipating the next part of this. It's really good. We're going to talk about Simpkins. We're going to talk about about how you figure out what these trails are. So what's next for our trail? I'm sorry, any more questions before I jump forward? What's next for the trail system? The main thing this park needs, and the main thing that is unfunded at this park is a master plan. We're working with the state government, working with DNR to get this master plan going. Patapsco is one of the busiest parks in the country with really significant support and engagement from our users. Incredibly diverse users, very unusual for a park like ours. We are within 2 hours of 6 million people. And we are right next to an airport. So, I'm sorry, let me go to this. Unique and historical assets. We are an incredibly well-subscribed park, and we've got things going on that many other parks don't have. So when I think about Patapsco, I think of places like Kingdom Trails in Vermont, Bentonville, Park City. We have all those assets right now. We are organically becoming this national trail destination. But what we need is a master plan. Our current master plan is 43 years old. And I'm putting this in red, not because I'm mad at DNR, but just I want to call your attention to it. I want everybody in this room to be a voice for getting the funding to make a new master plan for the park. So what's underway right now? Big adaptive trail expansion at the Keldon, huge build at Old Port Woodstock, the Simpkins Industries acquisition, Patapsco Trail Center, and mapping and signage. These are the things we're starting to work on right now. Here we go. We've been working very hard in Annapolis to raise money, and we are moving real resources through this park now. We have, in fiscal year 25, a $100,000 bond bill from Howard County for signage and mapping. We have an $800,000 appropriation for a bunch of new trail work in the park, including new signage and new adaptive trails. We have a $540,000 bond bill for the Simpkins acquisition, and a $300,000 appropriation for the remediation and potential parking at the Simpkins site after we get it. And we have a $340,000 bond bill for the Patapsco Trail Center. This is open funding right now. Also, we've got 3 open RTP grants. RTP means Recreational Trail Program. It's a federally funded thing that comes through MDOT so we can build trails. $240K for Old Port Woodstock, 109 for McKeldin, and 80 for the OEC connector. Where else is the funding coming from for us? Partners and sponsors. This is just a little graphic from the event. Who's at cocktails last week? It was fun, wasn't it? I think Ed Johnson's still a little hungover.
One bite.
So it's coming from partners and sponsors. We have really robust sponsorship and long-standing relationships in the community and in the outdoor industry and from the people you know and patronize. This is new. This is where else funding is coming from. We just slowly rolled out our membership platform. So for the rest of this year and certainly in 2025, we are fully converting to a membership organization. This is a big deal for Friends. It's time we do it because all we get asked is, how do I become a member of Friends? And we say, well, we're a membership organization. That's about to change. This is good too because this will be money we can count on. This is recurring money. This is money for staff. This is money for the accountants and lawyers and insurance and things like that. All right. Real quick, let's go through these new trail projects. The new adaptive trail being built in California. Currently, we have 1.5 miles. This is the existing 1.5 mile adaptive route. Starting in August, we're building an additional 3.5 miles of adaptive trails in McKeldin. We'll have 5 miles of adaptive trails in the McKeldin area of the park.
Is there any plan to break any of those trails to go on other trails on the North Branch? They're so close.
Hang tight, man. Okay, so then what we're working on is a major trail event. This is fully funded for the Woodstock Old Port area. We had a major event in Woodstock on Saturday. Woodstock is a very popular trail system, primarily because of the partnership we forged with the Woodstock Inn. The Woodstock Inn are good friends of ours. We put a kiosk and a bike fixing station there, 5 years ago, and that changed the Woodstock Inn. The food got twice as expensive, and the tap list got exponentially expanded. So they're very happy to be a trail run with Woodstock Inn. So what we're going to be doing in Woodstock is we're building a brand new 10-mile trail system in Woodstock. This trail system, I know this is a schematic graphic that shows how it's going to be built. It's using a lot of existing trails, but this is going to be a machine-built trail system. So it's going to have the character of the hand-built single-track trails, but we are fully resetting this in there. And one of the most important things about this is this star right here. In the FY 2016 budget, capital budget, the state of Maryland set aside a new bridge over the North Branch of the Patapsco River. We've been waiting. We've been bugging that we get this done. The drawings are 90% complete. But this is going to fundamentally change the north part of the park. You will be able to ride the entire McKeldin area and then cross the bridge and then ride the entire Woodstock area. And what's really unique about what's happening there is not only are we going to have this 5 miles of adaptive trail in McKeldin, all of this green is adaptive trail in Woodstock. We're going to have a 10-mile adaptive loop in the Woodstock and Culver area.
So cool.
I know, it's so cool. And this is funded. We've got money for this. So pretty excited about that. Here's just, this is the Woodstock Inn right here. That's a picture here. All right, here we go. So I think before I started working on Simpkins, I didn't have completely white hair, but I got it now. So a few years ago, we were charged with negotiating with the Simpkins Corporation for the purchase of the Simpkins Industries site. A lot of conversations, a lot of back and forth, a lot of intermittent grants along the way. We did negotiate a price with the Simpkins Industries Corporation for full purchase. So we have a $540,000 bond bill, and we're buying all 56 acres of the Simpkins site. That is in progress right now. The lawyers have it. I try and just mute the conversation and do something else while they're talking on Zoom calls, but we're close. I think Simpkins will be done in 2024. Yeah.
What about the college, St. Mary's College front?
What about that? Yeah. I actually don't have that there, but let's talk about that real quick. Any questions about Simpkins before I move across the river? Go ahead.
Are you gonna, you say you need bathrooms and, so you.
Let's talk about what we're gonna do with
Is it
Simpkins.
just on the Howard County side?
So, well, Simpkins is on both sides.
I'm just looking at colors, so
Okay.
tell me colors.
This, all this land right here, all the way up the river, on both sides is Simpkins. This is Simpkins. This is Simpkins. They own all of that land. They own both sides of the river, right out there. It's 56 acres. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna buy it, and then at the same table, the same day, we're gonna donate it to DNR, and it's gonna be their land. We have a separate appropriation for $300,000 for site work, so we gotta clean it up. I don't mean environmental cleanup, that's been done. I mean, just get the crap off the site. There are houses, there are structures, there's all kinds of things that need to be done. There probably will be some reforestation, and then what we want to do with this master plan is really look at what's it going to take to put parking in. What's it going to take? It's going to take some stuff. You know, that area is heavily used. It is a dumpster and a bathroom presently. So we want people to use that area, but we need to make sure they do it responsibly. It's going to take staff, and it's going to take additional infrastructure. But the first thing, the most important thing, is making this purchase. So I'm pretty stoked about that. Now, go ahead.
When you say remove the buildings, do you mean the remainders?
You're in charge of building removal. Okay? Next up. The next thing that's going to happen is I do think this is going to be a domino effect. I do think that after Simpkins happens, we're going to see either one-way or closure of River Road. River Road right now, there's only one private house on River Road. Everything else is fully owned by the park. So visioning it forward, we see River Road as an extension of the Griskin Trail. You know, in the future, you could come down, you could go through the Simpkins site and go across Thistle and get on River Road and go all the way to downtown Ellicott City. So that's the first thing that's going to fall. The second thing we're looking at already, it's already been discussed by some elected officials in Howard County, is the Howard County side of the river. There are two bookends there. There's private property on the Ellicott City side and CSX property on the Ellicott City side. And on the Ilchester Road side is the Redemptress property, which is privately owned. Everything in between is private. People are already using that connection socially, but I don't think that's too far away either. I think we will see a connection on the Howard County side. Simpkins is the linchpin. All right. Okay, we did that. Trail Center. Okay. I couldn't find an image of the Trail Center, but right here in the park, this is 104, 105, Gun Road. When you go through the tunnel under the CSX tracks, there is a house up here. The Park Service has given us that house, so we have a bond bill. We're going to refurbish that house, make it ADA compliant, and we're going to use that as the Patapsco Trail Center. We're going to have a caretaker up top, and the bottom is going to be a meeting area, a place for resources for the trail system. So we could see this meeting happening. We could see, Guinness having their retreats there. We're going to be able to use that as a flex space to help provision the trail system. That's right there, and that guy's also funded. That's ready to go. Mapping, signage, wayfinding, okay. So, not only is there no master plan of the park, there's no maps of the park. The DNR does not even employ a GIS professional. I know that's hard to believe, but it's true. So, one of the things this new capital money is going to do is it's going to provide for us to fully map the park. So we're going to see new maps of the park, both electronically and print. 25 new kiosks in the park and 100 new Carsonite posts. I'm sorry, 1,000 new Carsonite posts in the park. The park is going to become much better marked and much more navigable. The main thing, the main reason we want to do this is because of this. There's my pointer there. Right here. Rescues, extractions in the park are non-stop. This park is so close to kind of casual users, and the trail system is so long and so difficult. It's an advanced trail system. The people get out there, people get hurt, and nobody knows where the hell they are. So that's the main thing this new mapping is going to do. On every Carsonite post, there's going to be a numeric system where they can say, I map this signpost, and our life safety professionals will be able to find it. Oh, so that's it. But right now, if you want to map of the park, go to OpenStreetMap, osm.org. That's the most current map of the park, osm.org. Those screenshots of the trails, those all came from OSM.
What about all trails? Doesn't that have, I mean, that has trails.
It does, but here's the thing about all trails. All trails is generally user-generated. So all trails, people are putting their trails on private property, and they're putting them across railroad tracks and things like that. OSM has an admin, and they don't let that happen.
Hey, Dave.
Yo.
Back to the Simpkins thing.
Okay.
That's quite a historic town there, Vilchester, that there's almost no remains of except a couple stone houses up on Hilltop there. And I'm hoping when all that is renovated and all, there'll be maybe some historic markers and some signage. That was quite a thriving town until the 70s.
Yeah, MHT is really involved with what's going on.
Yeah, I knew quite a few families that lived there.
Yeah, that's...
They refused to include the village. They were trying to remove the dam. I was the historic preservation professional, and they would not let me write it as the dam, the mill, and the village. Just FYI.
I feel you. The programming of Simpkins, I'm happy to hand that over to DNR and MHT and let them work it out. I'm trying to raise the money and get it purchased so it's part of Patapsco Valley State Park. There are other professionals in this room even that I think have a better handle on that. There'll be a lot of cooks in this kitchen, no doubt. Mapping, signage, wayfinding. Anyway, so all new signage is going in the park, and I think you guys have already seen all of our signage now is in Spanish, Korean, and English. That's a big gesture towards inclusivity. There's so much more, but I don't have time to talk about it, and I'm sick of hearing myself. So, who's got questions?
Any update on the bridge across Route 1 as part of the trail system?
So there's lines on maps. You know, I'm on that planning board with BMC, but no, I have no updates on that right now.
So I mean, the engineering was supposed to be completed by now.
Are you talking about down at Elkridge? Yeah,
They'll get Elkridge across to get us.
Yeah, I've definitely not seen any engineering drawings on that yet. Yeah. I think that's tracking a little bit right now. Yeah. Oh, we need lots of stuff. That one's a ways out. Any other questions?
What's the status of BGE trails and access roads? Are they kind of open or just casual? Technically, you're not supposed to trespass on them?
Well, we actually are using parts. We have some. Much of the BG&E lines in the park are on park property. So BG&E has an easement to have those lines there. So we have official trail that crosses them. So you can cross them on our official trail system as far as just, you know, riding your KTM on it or something. Probably not. But I don't know if there's an official status for that actually. That's a good question for park manager.
I live in Drexel Woods Townhouse, as you know, and I hike there all the time. And there's a great trail system on both sides of the river. But if you want to go from one side to the other, you got to cross Route 40 or Johnny Cake, dangerous crossings. Has there been any thought of putting a swinging bridge where Cedar Creek comes into the river there?
Well, there has been some discussion about that. You know, there has been some discussion and some imagery sort of related to what they did in Belle Isle and Richmond. That made, I think it's in '95, they hung a suspension bridge from it. And when the Route 40 bridge was getting worked on, that kind of heated up a little bit. But you're right. And I think Rob said it earlier, if you want to go anywhere in the Patapsco, if you want to go 2 miles away, you got to drive 15 miles to get there. I mean, that is the Patapsco Valley. When the river's low, it can be refreshing. In summer,
I do it all the time.
yeah, I know you do. I know you do. Yeah, but going from that Devil's Horns, Pickall area into Hollowfield, you've got to leave the river.
Yeah,
They had that temporary bridge up when they redid Cedar Creek.
I know, I wish they kept it.
Me too.
Yeah, I wish they would have left that. That was great.
That was great.
Charles Wagandt tried very hard.
Bridges over the Patapsco River are complicated and expensive.
Dave, we're at 8 o'clock, so I want to caution folks on time, but I want to make sure folks had questions for Rob too. You know, we get a final question or two in before we wrap up, since we've been here a couple hours. So I don't know if anyone had questions for Rob earlier.
What's Ragland?
That was a name I saw on the map and went, oh, that's interesting, I should probably include that then. So it looks like it was a Elkridge equivalent on the Wagandt County side, based on that. With the last
Never heard that.
I hadn't either until I started researching this. I think it's briefly mentioned in Brooks and Rothwell's book on the history of Wagandt County, probably for the same reason, you probably saw it in the same map. Yeah.
What were your sources for the historical maps of Patapsco? Can the public have access to the?
Like the ancient maps or the more modern, or
Like the
the
1700.
Library of Congress website. I just literally keyword searched Maryland on the Library of Congress website and went down to maps and just literally went chronologically to see what was on there.
Are there any more questions for our speakers?
For either Dave or Rob.
So I
Thank you all for coming tonight, for joining us for the 3rd annual Charles L. Wagandt II Memorial Lecture. We hope you've learned a lot about our state park, our trails, and Charles's numerous efforts. We intend to carry on this tradition of the annual talks, and if you're interested in supporting public education reflective of Charles Wagandt's initiatives in architectural and heritage preservation, archaeology, recreation, environmental sustainability, and valley accessibility, we encourage you to donate generously to the PHG's Charles L. Wagandt Memorial Fund. And we are also selling books in the back if you're interested in getting the books that have been mentioned before. So thank you very much. The idea of other speakers, if anybody would like to suggest other topics or speakers that would be appropriate.